The potatoes had gone cold. I didn't notice until the butter on my plate sat untouched, congealed like the silence around me. Trista pushed her fork around her chicken, barely eating. Letty scrolled under the table, pretending to be invisible. Jonah kicked his leg rhythmically against the chair. And Callum, my son the boy I once carried through 3 days of fever without sleeping, was glaring at me like I was the stain on his shirt he couldn't quite scrub out. I made the salad, I said softly, though I didn't know why I said anything at all. Callum dropped his fork with a clatter. The salad, that's what you're proud of. He stood abruptly, chair legs screeching against the tile. You've been lying in that room all day. Don't you think it's time you started pulling your weight? My cheeks flushed with shame and something hotter, more dangerous. I wanted to tell him about the shooting pain in my hips, how I hadn't slept more than 3 hours in a row since the coughing started again, but I'd been a nurse for 40 years. I knew the signs of worsening health, and I knew how people looked at you when you couldn't do what you used to. You think I'm faking, don't you? I said more to myself than to him. He didn't flinch. If you're well enough to sit there, you're well enough to cook. Stop faking and do your part. Trista didn't look up. She just sipped her wine. I looked around the table at the faces I once believed I was building a future for. Letty wouldn't meet my eyes. Jonah had paused, watching like children do when they know something cruel just happened. But don't understand it, toy. In kai sprayed. En froskerisel, brilliantly. Callum stood over me with arms crossed, waiting for a reaction. I stood not quickly. My joints argued with me, but steadily. I collected my plate untouched and brought it to the sink. I didn't eat that night. Instead, I went upstairs, opened the bottom drawer of the wardrobe, and pulled out the green folder I hadn't touched in over a decade. Inside were records, copies of tuition checks, rent receipts, medical bills, grocery stubs, even birthday party deposits from years when Callum's bank account had more overdraft fees than dollars. I ran my fingers over each faded line item as if reading scripture. He wanted a contribution, I would give him one. I sat on the edge of the bed, the folder open across my knees like an old wound, split, back open. The paper smelled faintly of mildew and time. Each document had been filed with care chronologically by year and purpose. I remembered thinking back then that keeping records was just good practice. I never imagined I'd need them as evidence. There was the check I wrote to cover Callum's first apartment when he couldn't scrape together the deposit. The tuition payments to the community college he dropped out of halfway through. The $800 I wired to Trista's mother for their wedding venue when they'd run out of room on the credit card. I had the dental bills for the kids, the receipts from Christmas toys I bought on my nurse's salary, the grocery totals from those months when they said food stamps hadn't come through. It was all here, all the little pieces of myself I'd handed away, and yet tonight I'd been told I was useless, a burden, a liar. My fingers stopped on a photo tucked behind a 2011 tax document. It was Callum and me in the kitchen of our old house. His face was rounder, then his arms looped around my shoulders. We were smiling, covered in flour. I could still hear the laughter from that day, still remember how much he loved the cinnamon rolls we made from scratch. He used to call them Mom's armor, said nothing bad could happen after one bite. Now he barely saw me as human. Grief has a weight that makes you tired in the bones. That night, I didn't cry. I couldn't. My body felt hollow, as if too many years had been poured out into someone who saw them only as background noise. I slid the folder back into the drawer, but this time I left it near the front. I had forgotten who I was trying to protect with my silence. It had never been me. At dawn, I called Dean Halberd's office and asked for a consultation. The receptionist sounded surprised to hear my voice, but she booked me in for Thursday afternoon. Dean Halberd looked older, but not in the way people grow frail. He wore his years, like the leather binding of his law books, weathered but solid. When I walked into his office, he rose from behind the desk, blinking like I'd been conjured from a memory. "Odessa Marin," he said slowly. "Haven't seen you since?" His voice trailed off, respectful enough not to say the funeral. I nodded and took a seat without waiting. "I need your help, Dean." Quietly, he studied me the way doctors used to study my hands when I told them the tremors weren't from age. A pause. Then he opened his notebook. "Go ahead." I told him what I wanted. I didn't stumble. I didn't soften. I asked about revoking the financial access I'd once extended to Callum after my husband passed the co-signed insurance, the emergency credit line, the power of attorney on file with the bank. Dean's brows lifted slightly, but he didn't interrupt. Not until I asked about transferring the house title, removing it from the trust, and placing it solely under my control so I could sell it without needing anyone's approval. "Does Callum know you're doing this?" he asked gently. "No, and I'd like it to stay that way until it's done." He leaned back, tapping the pen to his lips. "You always were the quiet one between you and Conrad. I remember him calling you the heart of the house." "I was," I said, "but now I have to be the spine." He nodded, once the kind of nod that held both permission and respect. "I'll draw up the revocation forms, cancel the third-party authorizations, and start the title reassignment. If you'd like to set up a trust in your name alone, I can add that too." "Yes, do that." He closed the folder. "You're sure?" I looked him in the eye. "I gave my son everything. Now I'm giving myself the rest." He didn't say another word, just rose and shook my hand firm and without pity. By the time I left his office, the air outside felt lighter, as if some invisible cord had snapped free from my chest. Back home, I took out a fresh sheet of stationery and began writing the first letter. I've always believed in the weight of words when spoken gently. But this time, I needed the kind that couldn't be interrupted, ink on paper. I started with Callum's letter, not in anger, though I had reason. I wrote it like patient notes, factual, dated, precise. I listed every dollar I'd spent since he turned 21, the loans, the rent, the groceries, the kids' coats, even the $12.99 for the streaming service I never used. Not to shame him, just to show him the truth. At the bottom, I added one line: "You were never in debt to me for the money, but you owed me your care, and you broke that." Trista's letter was shorter, sharper. I reminded her of the day she cried in my kitchen after her miscarriage, how I held her until she slept. I reminded her I was the one who drove her to her mother's chemo sessions when Callum had meetings. Then I wrote how it felt to hear her call me deadweight last spring when she thought I wasn't listening. I didn't ask for anything in return. I just gave her the truth. The letter to Letty and Jonah took the most time. I left out the shouting, the bitterness, the money. Children don't need that weight. I wrote about our bedtime stories, the tulips we planted in April, the way Jonah used to hold my hand without thinking. I told them love sometimes means leaving when staying teaches the wrong lesson. I folded each letter, sealed them in ivory envelopes, marked simply CT and J&L. Then I placed them in my jewelry box next to my wedding band and a photo of Callum as a baby wrapped in Conrad's old flannel shirt. 2 days later, Trista knocked on my door frame and said, "Sunday dinner's pot roast. Please be on time." The pot roast was dry. Trista had overcooked it again, but no one dared say a word. Callum poured gravy over his like cement chewing, with purpose, lips tight. Letty tapped her glass with a spoon until Jonah shoved her hand away. The whole table was taut like a bridge, ready to snap. But I said nothing. I passed the rolls. I offered more corn. I smiled when no one looked at me. I had worn my navy cardigan, the one with the missing button I never got around to replacing. It still smelled faintly of lavender. My hands were calm, steady, more so than they had been in weeks. When Trista brought out the dessert, a tray of store-bought brownies, topped with melting canned whipped cream, I waited until everyone had been served. Then I reached into my bag and took out the envelope. I didn't say a word, just placed it gently on Callum's plate beside the half-eaten brownie and resumed sipping my tea. He stared at it, confused. "What's this?" I looked him in the eye. "It's everything." He tore it open with a scoff, pulling out the letter and the single page that followed it, a printed spreadsheet with rows of numbers and line items going back over 20 years. His brow furrowed as he scanned it. The chewing stopped. Everyone stopped. Trista leaned closer. "What is it?" Callum read aloud, voice tight. "Effective immediately. All financial support from Odessa Marin has been terminated. Total lifetime contribution, $274, $188.65. Notice of house sale enclosed." He blinked. "What the hell is this?" I took another sip of tea. Exactly what it says. He looked up, face flushed, jaw tight. "You're selling the house." I nodded. "It's mine to sell." The silence that followed was thick and sour. Trista opened her mouth, then shut it. Letty looked at Jonah, who looked at me uncertain. I stood, slowly took my mug to the sink, rinsed it and set it down. No one moved. In the hallway, I picked up my overnight bag already packed. I didn't say goodbye. The cab driver was early. We pulled away just as the porch light flickered on behind me. The silence in the cab was a kind I hadn't felt in years, thick but gentle. I watched the familiar houses roll past each porch, light flickering like a distant warning. I didn't ask the driver to turn on the radio. I didn't make small talk. I just stared forward, breathing in the stillness like oxygen I'd forgotten I needed. By morning, I was staying in a modest guest house owned by a retired school teacher named Doreen, who let the room out to visiting family or women getting away from things. I didn't offer much explanation, and she didn't press. We spoke about weather tomatoes and good tea. Nothing heavier. 3 days after I left, I received the first call. It wasn't Callum. It was the electric company. They needed to verify that the account which I had opened in my name years ago had been officially transferred. I told them it had not and would not be. I authorized a disconnection, effective immediately. Next came the water, then the gas. I had set a 7-day buffer on the mortgage paperwork, which I revoked on the 5th day. The bank confirmed the reversal and reinitiated the lien processing. The house wasn't truly theirs, no matter how many years they'd claimed it. I didn't block their numbers, but I didn't answer them either. Callum left 2 voicemails, both angry, the second one slurred and bitter. Trista sent one text that said, "We have children." I stared at the screen until it went black. Then I slid the phone into a drawer and went for a walk. That Saturday, I walked into a cafe near the guest house and ordered coffee without looking over my shoulder. It felt strange to sit at a table and know no one expected anything of me. I paid with my own card. I sipped it slowly. By Sunday morning, I learned through a mutual friend that Callum's credit card had been declined at the kids' school registration. Jonah was on a wait list now. They hadn't told him why. That same afternoon, I signed a lease for a small cottage 2 hours north, tucked into a coastal town I hadn't visited in decades. The cottage smelled of salt and old pine, with floors that creaked just enough to remind me I was still standing. The landlord, a woman named Etta, who wore sun hats, even on cloudy days, handed me the keys without ceremony and said, "Start fresh, sweetheart." I took them with both hands. Florence came by with a basket of groceries and a bottle of wine I didn't need. She didn't ask questions, only raised an eyebrow at the lack of boxes. I told her I brought what mattered. She stayed long enough to wipe the counters and make tea, then kissed the top of my head like she used to when I got fevers as a child. The town was quiet, patient. A harbor village with one hardware store, one post office, and a diner with the same 5 daily specials scrawled on a chalkboard. I liked it more each time I passed the bay and didn't see anything that looked like obligation. I planted zinnias outside the front window. The soil was sandy, but forgiving. I spoke to the roots as I tucked them in, and for the first time in months, my knees didn't ache when I stood back up. The neighbors waved as they walked their dogs. No one knew my name, and that felt like mercy. My bank account, once filtered through Callum's emergencies and Trista's accidental overdrafts, was finally still. I checked it once a week, only to remind myself it was real. At the library, I joined a book club that didn't care about biographies or bestsellers. We read poems out loud. One week, someone brought carrot cake. I took 2 slices home. On Jonah's birthday, I bought a card with a watercolor fox and wrote, "I hope 11 feels strong and kind. Love, Grandma O." I didn't include a return address. I walked it to the post office myself, wearing a scarf I hadn't worn since before my husband died. The air was crisp and full of tide. When I turned back up the hill, my garden caught the light, just right. And I remembered how color always finds its way back through broken things. The first whisper must have come from a grocery clerk, or maybe the receptionist at the pediatric clinic who'd seen too many past due notices to keep her smile steady. Word travels strangely when it's about money, quiet at first, then all at once. Florence forwarded me a scanned clipping from the local newsletter, one I hadn't even realized I was in. There I was in a photo with dirt on my palms and a straw hat half tipped off my head, standing beside a wooden sign painted in pale blues, Second Bloom Community Garden. The caption called me a generous new resident with a gift for flowers and kindness. I chuckled when I read it. Florence said it was already tacked to the bulletin board at her church. Meanwhile, back in the city, the cracks had deepened. A friend from the old neighborhood called Florence to say she'd overheard Callum's name during a lunch at the country club. Something about missed mortgage payments. Something about his mother cutting him off without warning. Florence didn't tell me right away. She said she wasn't sure I wanted to hear it, but I did. I needed to. Later that week, Trista's Instagram went quiet. The carefully filtered photos of seasonal charcuterie boards and color-coordinated birthday parties disappeared. One post remained a blurry photo of Jonah at a park alone on a swing. The caption was blank. A former church friend, Elaine, I believe, sent a note through Florence oddly formal Saw Odessa in a newsletter. She looked, happy. Please let her know we miss her at St. Agnes. I didn't reply. I heard through the library clerk that our garden had inspired 2 other plots nearby. People really like the name, she said. Second Bloom. It gives them hope. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of mint tea and watched the sky turn violet. I thought about Callum, not with anger, not even with sorrow. Just a quiet wondering of whether he ever walked through the house and noticed how empty silence could feel when no one was absorbing the weight of his needs. The next morning, the postman handed me a padded envelope with no return label, but the handwriting was unmistakable. I recognized the knock before I reached the door. Too sharp for a neighbor, too fast for the postman. Trista stood there, pale beneath a layer of makeup, her blouse, wrinkled shoes, mismatched. She gripped her purse strap like it might hold her together. Odessa, she said, voice brittle. I wouldn't be here if I stepped aside. She entered like a gust of old air, perfume nervous, worn thin. She didn't sit, just looked around, like she couldn't believe, quiet, like this existed. Callum's not okay, she said. He won't say it, but he's unraveling. We didn't know it was this bad. You did, I said. She flinched. We didn't think you were serious. I opened the hallway drawer and took out the letter. The same one I'd placed on his dinner plate, now reprinted cleaner. I had added a new line in ink. I handed it to her. She read quickly, eyes widening at the final sentence. You didn't lose my support. You burned it. Her voice cracked. We have kids. So did I said. And I taught them how to treat people. I didn't come here to fight. Good. I'm not offering one. She stood there searching for the right words. I didn't help her find them. What do we do now? She finally asked. I folded my hands. What I did. Start smaller. Tell the truth. She shook her head, voice low. Callum won't make it. Then he won't, I said. That's not mine to carry anymore. She left, holding the envelope like a doorstop, hoping it would open something back up. I didn't watch her drive away. There was bread to rise rosemary, to trim and light, moving off the porch. Later that afternoon, I slid a note card for Jonah into my bag and headed toward the post office. The garden's full, now wild, stubborn, and bright. I walk its little path each morning with a cup of chamomile and bare feet on the soft soil. The rosemary has taken to the corner bed with a vengeance, and the daisies refuse to stay in their neat rows, which suits me just fine. Some things don't need fences to thrive. I heard from Florence last week that Callum's renting a 1-bedroom on the other side of town. No yard, no garage, no mention of a job. Just rumors passed gently, like people weren't sure whether to feel sorry for him or still afraid to say my name aloud in his presence. Trista, they say, picked up hours at a local bakery. Letty transferred to public school. Jonah, sweet boy, won a drawing contest last month. I sent a donation to the school library in his name, anonymously, of course. They used it to buy new reading chairs and a collection of biographies for kids who ask too many questions. I smiled when I read that. None of them have reached out again. No letters, no phone calls, no apologies, just the space I asked for finally granted. The silence no longer feels like absence. It feels earned. At night, I light a candle in the kitchen and leave the back door open. The sea air drifts through, carrying a chorus of crickets and the faint rustle of petals settling down. I've stopped counting what was taken from me. I've started counting what grew in its place. The The last letter I wrote, I didn't send. I folded it carefully and placed it at the bottom of the same green folder that once held everything I gave away. The envelope is unmarked, but inside it simply says, "The most expensive things I ever gave were free. Never again." I sealed it, tied the folder with twine, and placed it in a small cedar box I keep by the window. Sometimes I open it not to revisit the hurt, but to remember the line I drew and kept. Then I go out to water the marigolds and let the light find me,